let's be clear, Bitcoin is an international asset.
We are spending like drunken sailors.
Bitcoin is the only economic entity where the supply is unaffected by the demand.
If you want to preserve your wealth, you have to convert that currency into an asset that's scarce, desirable, portable, durable, and maintainable.
Hello, my name is Andy Edstrom, and I'm happy to welcome you to the 16th episode of Scarce Assets, a show that examines scarcity, the most fundamental driver of economics and markets, and the scarcest asset of all, which is Bitcoin. My co-host Jesse is traveling today, but he'll be back for the next episode. In the meantime, I'm happy to introduce my guest, Alex Thorn. Now, Alex is head of firm-wide research at Galaxy Digital, where he leads a team of researchers covering the crypto ecosystem. Prior to that, he spent 12 years at Fidelity Investments, where he co-managed Avon Ventures, the early-stage crypto VC fund affiliated with the parent company. And before that, he was director of blockchain research at Fidelity Center for Applied Technology, where he directed tech experimentation and also published research. Now I'm going to add my editorial here, which is that although he covers a wide space that many people would label as general crypto, I think Alex is one of the very best researchers in the field who gives Bitcoin the respect it deserves. And he also has a great podcast called Galaxy Brains. I listen to it all the time, including this morning when I heard his great interview with Richie Torres, and I'm sure we'll talk about that today. So, Alex, thank you for the work you do, and thank you for coming on Scarce Assets. How are you?
I'm great, Andy. Thanks for having me. I'm a big fan also of your work, and I think that's right, by the way. I look at the world through the crypto world through a Bitcoin lens, right? I'm a longtime Bitcoiner. I think it's the most important project in crypto. I think it's very different from blockchains and crypto as a segment. I think you're crazy if you're interested in this technology or the crypto asset class and you don't own Bitcoin. You're absolutely underweight. I think the most important digital asset that there is. But also, I mean, I think there's a lot more to Bitcoin than its technology. You know, longtime followers of crypto will know that there have been literally dozens of attempts at creating a, quote, better Bitcoin. None of them have been better than Bitcoin, and most of them have outright failed. There's plenty of reasons for that, but I am interested in blockchain technology. I'm interested in what it can do. I'm interested in the segments like DeFi and I am interested in distributed networking and whether other types of blockchains have other features. But I think Bitcoin is the most important. I think it's likely to be the most important for a long time. And it's very interesting. And we have a huge Bitcoin businesses at Galaxy. A giant portion of our company is focused on Bitcoin trading, Bitcoin lending, Bitcoin mining, right? Galaxy is involved in the whole of markets. So of course we also do other things in the broader crypto space, but I think Bitcoin's
king.
Michael Saylor
Bitcoin's
says,
king.
Bitcoin there is no second best, right? So I'm interested in everything. I have a team of researchers. I mostly research Bitcoin and regulation and markets. I have other researchers who cover Ethereum and stuff. And I think it's perfectly valid to be interested in the broader crypto ecosystem. I think there's other interesting things happening, but there is, you come at the king, you best not miss. There's something different and special happening with Bitcoin than the other things.
Well, let's talk about coming at the king, and let's talk about, let's just throw you some red meat. Let's talk about politics. For a minute. So,
yeah,
you recently published a thread on Twitter X discussing why a Kamala Harris administration, if elected, might continue with policies that are basically hostile to Bitcoin and crypto. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and I think the big first caveat is we really don't know. We don't know. Kamala Harris has yet to speak after winning the nomination off the teleprompter, right? So outside of a few rallies with scripted remarks, we don't have any platform from her. We don't have any policy positions. We have the Biden administration's positions, of which she was the vice president. And we know that those were broadly negative. I mean, Bitcoin doesn't have a lot of business before the government in the scheme of things, certainly not like crypto does, which is, all entangled in questions of securities or commodities and various types of financial regulation questions. Bitcoin's primary things, I would say, before, from a legislative and regulatory standpoint, obviously the Bitcoin ETF was business before the SEC. They had to be dragged kicking and screaming with the DC Circuit Court of Appeals ruling to even do that, but they have done it now. So I would say there's not much business for Bitcoin at the SEC level. There are possibilities that the CFTC's mandate could expand into spot markets, which could result in more regulation of spot Bitcoin trading. And then I would say the big questions that, by the way, Bitcoin and crypto share, it still has, right? Is self-custody legal? Do blockchain nodes, even home nodes, lightning nodes, just straight up archival nodes that merely relay transactions, so they have to perform bank-like compliance activities? Should you have what do they call it? The travel rule, like should transactions have to be KYC'd? Should miners have to KYC the transactions in their blocks, right? These questions are big, important questions that are in some cases existential, in my view, for the legality of Bitcoin. I don't think Bitcoin could be outright banned in the US. And I think in the long run, Bitcoin will survive anyway, but that would be bad. And I think these questions overlap between Bitcoin and crypto. The Ethereum people are just as concerned about whether miners have to transact all their transactions the same way would this proof of stake validators have to do that, right? So I think there is plenty of overlap. This is something I think Bitcoiners miss sometimes. They say, like, what do we care? Bitcoin's not on the menu at the SEC. There's other stuff out there that's not good. We don't have any concrete policy positions from the Democratic presidential ticket yet. And as far as I can tell, neither Kamala Harris nor Tim Walz have ever mentioned the word crypto or Bitcoin, ever. I don't even think they've said the word blockchain, right? So we don't know. So what we look to for guidance on this is who is advising them on economic and financial regulatory policy. And again, it's still early. I mean, I think it's a lot of people are optimistic that it's possible we could get a slightly better outcome under a Harris-Walz administration than under a Biden-Harris administration. We know that the Trump-Vance ticket is extremely favorable. So, but I'm of the view that Bitcoin is nonpartisan. It's frankly apolitical. I think there are some aspects of it that are appealing to different political factions. For example, its perfect scarcity, aligns well with Austrian economic monetary theory. Its radical permissionlessness and self-sovereignty, appeals to people that want independence from government. Like, there are some sort of, I think, like small lowercase p political aspects to the platform itself and the network itself. There's also plenty, though, that appeal broadly to, more classic American liberal values, like, no intermediaries. No, you can't be redlined by your bank, right? It doesn't see race or gender or sexual orientation, right? All that stuff is very positive. So I think in general, it's mostly apolitical. It certainly should be nonpartisan, in my view. And I think for any industry or project or platform or asset to be, have great success in America, it certainly shouldn't be seen as a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. So I'm very in favor of reaching out to the Democratic Party and trying to help them understand the promise of Bitcoin and that it is positive and it can be positive for America. So I'm open and I'm hoping that we'll get open to and hoping that we get better policies out of a Harris-Walz ticket. And if they win a Harris-Walz administration than we currently have. But like I said, people are policy, and some of the people that apparently reported by both the Journal and Bloomberg are advising Vice President Harris include two notoriously anti-crypto and Bitcoin people, Brian Deese and Bharat Ramamurthy. Brian led the National Economic Council. Bharat was his deputy for 2 or 3 years, all around the time that the Biden administration did this executive order mandated survey of crypto, right? They looked at a whole bunch of stuff, including Bitcoin mining, all across the government. And they have a very strong anti-crypto bent. And I would venture to say they were at the center of this Operation Choke Point 2.0, which I'm happy to summarize for the audience if that is helpful. But we're pretty confident they were key architects of that. And by the way, that, which is effectively the systematic, coercive, either debanking or creating of roadblocks and barriers for just companies involved in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency to have bank accounts and for banks to deal with companies like this, which I think is a fundamentally un-American thing to do, right? For legal businesses, make it impossible for them to get banking. That's, you can't pay employees very easily without a bank account in the scheme of things. Sure, you can pay them in Bitcoin or stable coins or whatever, but it's pretty hard to exist in American capital markets without a bank account. So we don't know what they're doing for her. Again, we don't know a lot about this policy, but just sort of throwing up the red flag here that these are two people who really don't like us. That's what that thread was about. And, but again, like I said, we should reserve judgment. I think the question is if they end up being central to a Harris-Walz administration's financial policy, that's bad for us.
At Onramp, we believe that Bitcoin is the most important asset of the 21st century. The hard part is securing it right. There are shortcomings with keeping your coins on an exchange, but also with setting up your own self-custody arrangement. Onramp solves for these concerns. Our multi-institution custody solution maximizes security and minimizes counterparty risk, ensuring that your Bitcoin remains securely in your possession, and provides built-in inheritance planning to ensure your family is protected as well. Onramp provides peace of mind for your Bitcoin journey, whether for your whole stack or for part of it as a complement to your existing self-custody setup. For more information, check us out at onrampbitcoin.com.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that summary. It makes me think about, okay, there's more cards to be turned over in the poker game here. We don't know that much, but the cards that have been turned over are not great. The flop has come and it doesn't look fantastic. We still got a couple more cards coming. I'm curious about the feels. I mean, and I don't want you to speak for your boss, Mike Novogratz, but I think he's a pretty committed Democrat. I just wonder what the feeling is among guys like him who are committed Democrats in terms of, the educational effort. I know people on the Democratic side who are Bitcoiners have reached out, have made significant efforts to help educate the Democratic side. I'm sure in any way they're willing to accept help and information. I mean, is there a feeling of frustration kind of generalized at this point? Do you have any sense, not speaking for particular individuals, but just kind of the group?
Yeah, I think people are trying to get to them, right? I mean, there is a concerted effort to try to get in front of the Harris-Walz teams to educate them on Bitcoin and why it's good and why it's not a threat to the country, right? And why you should, why it's part of an innovation mandate, why there are jobs that Bitcoin brings, why it's good for the energy grid, right? Like there are a lot of efforts, I think, from a lot of different people. My sense is that it's the message they're getting back is that the campaign is open to this, but we haven't seen a lot of engagement, right? I mean, even, we're recording this on Thursday, August 15th. On Wednesday last night, the 14th, there was this call, Crypto for Harris. And this is mostly organized, my understanding, by, Democratic activists in Washington who may work on crypto policy either for companies or lobbying firms or whatnot. And, there were some appearances from prominent Democrats, Chuck Schumer, but a lot of these were via video, pre-recorded video. There was no, my understanding is appearance from any official from the Harris-Walz campaign. There aren't really that many officials yet. So it seems sort of like I would say I think people are a little frustrated. I do think people are actually optimistic, though. One, the campaign is through channels officially signaling openness to this conversation. They're just not really engaging yet in it. And yeah, I mean, there is concern about like if Brian Deese and Bharat Ramamurthy are deeply involved in shaping this campaign's economic policy. To be clear, like Bitcoin and crypto is like pretty low on the list of priorities for like American economic policy people. Things like inflation and global trade are higher on the list. But what I think people want is to get the candidates to care, right? Because if they care, then the policy won't simply be outsourced to these technocrats and bureaucrats, because if it is Bharat Ramamurthy and no one gives him some other mandate on this issue, we know where he stands, and it's highly restrictive, combative to Bitcoin. And so, I would say it's cautious optimism. I would also say that, like, I think most of us believe that it can't really get worse than in a Biden administration. They were extremely hostile, particularly the SEC, particularly Treasury. Another person who's been floated in those same articles and reported to be, on a short list for Treasury Secretary is this guy, Wally Adeyemo. And Wally he's not as bad as Bharat. He doesn't appear to be as combative, but he's very aligned with the KYC AML on blockchain nodes, on miners thing that really emanates from Elizabeth Warren, right? And that's not great. So I would say it's cautious optimism. I think most likely, I've even said this straight up for Bitcoin price. Like, I think we're in a range. We're in the 50 to 70K range. I don't think we really go much lower than the 49K dip we had on last Monday on the Japanese yen carry trade unwind situation. But and I think you probably can't get worse than probably even a no engagement Harris administration might even be just slightly better because of some turnover. But I think the potential upside is huge. I think a Trump victory is very supportive for Bitcoin. So you're meant to be cautiously protective on the downside and own wingy upside, or certainly be long in the face of that. I don't think so I would say broadly people aren't that worried, but we're not getting much back yet from that campaign.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. And some of that, I'm sure, comes from long experience, years in the space, which is there's always FUD. Well, so there's always FUD, but there's always, I guess, real substantive threats, at least potentially from government. And some days I wake up thinking, they're all going to come at us guns blazing. And then other days I wake up thinking, this is, I don't know, for me, 7 years in now. And it's like, nothing really that bad has happened. Nothing existential. And yeah, I like your framing of sort of Trump election, probably big upside potential for Bitcoin. Harris election, probably not much worse. So maybe heads I win, tails I don't lose, or something along those lines. Oh, and also, by the way, we're still at only $1 trillion and change of network value for Bitcoin, fraction of the value of gold.
Yeah, to be clear, all else equal, a Harris administration, assuming they're not catastrophically worse than the current situation, you have to remain bullish on Bitcoin. It's not, Bitcoin doesn't stay in that range forever. I think of that range as basically through the election, right? We sort of think about it that way. I don't see other major catalysts, upside or downside, between now and then. I think that probably is the main catalyst for the next few months. But again, in a Harris-Walz victory scenario, it's probably not much more restrictive from a regulatory standpoint than it is now. Yeah. And then you still have global macro conditions. You have, the perpetual, degradation of the dollar. You have Fed policy, which is likely to turn to easing, which should be supportive for scarce assets. And so and you have the adoption curve, you have the ETF adoptions, you have plenty of longer term, all those longer term Bitcoin catalysts remain. So I don't, I think it's fine. I think this is why you saw 49K bought up like crazy when it went down to that level. Even I had a sub 20%, down 20% limit buy order set on River that I'd even forgotten about, that I woke up to being filled on at 50K to 50.2 or something. I think people are very constructive on the trajectory for Bitcoin. It's more of a question of, and I think it is fair to point out, the risks, the regulatory risk broadly applies much more to other cryptos than it does to Bitcoin in general, right? So much of that risk is related to the securities laws, which Bitcoin's really immune to at this point. There's no. So I think Bitcoin in particular is, and I've said this, I was calling for ETH-BTC to go much lower last fall. I would say it's pretty low now. So I'm not necessarily calling, I haven't rewritten. I'm still basically in the, it should go lower. But the main thesis there was just that all of these regulatory rules are so much more damaging to the Ethereum world than Bitcoin. There's custody rule stuff. There's the exchange definition. There's AML KYC stuff that's hits it more than Bitcoin, right? And some of that has eased with recent Supreme Court rulings and other things. But the downside scenario of a Harris Waltz campaign victory in itself applies much more broadly to the broader cryptocurrency landscape than it does to Bitcoin anyway. But yes, that's how I think about it.
Well, that's awesome. So first of all, good on you for having the stink bid in for Bitcoin that you didn't even remember, that you forgot. It's like finding the $20 bill in the couch cushions.
It was.
Except Bitcoin's much better than finding fiat. So I
Totally.
love that. You brought up ETH in terms of BTC, and we're not an ETH podcast, but I am really actually interested in your take there. I look at a chart, the very long-term chart, ETH BTC, and I see sort of a giant, triangle or narrowing range, like since inception. And lately, the upper edge of that narrowing range has been, ETH BTC has been falling, kind of sort of bleeding out over a significant period of time now. And then it just dumped recently. And it may have dumped out of, the support edge of the range, the bottom edge of the range. So I guess I do want to ask you, I mean, you said you haven't published, so maybe you're sort of reserving judgment, but is this the failure of that, of that cross, or still could there be, another alt season, who knows, next year, God knows when?
It's a really interesting question. And yeah, I mean, I think long-term Bitcoiners don't need to care too much about this one way or another. I also don't think it is a zero-sum game in general in markets. Like, wealth can be created. Yeah. Look, the Ethereum people can make money, and that doesn't, I don't view that as being negative to Bitcoin. Like, that's, they're different. I view them as different. I think they are, obviously, if you look into how these blockchains operate and what their purposes are, they are different. Some people have a different view on that. A lot of Bitcoiners that I'm friends with say that it takes away investment from Bitcoin. But like, look, Bitcoin doesn't do the things that Ethereum does, most of them, and that's good. Like, I think they should be different. Yeah, I mean, look, it years ago in like 16, 17, ETH BTC was much higher. Briefly, it spiked huge. Then during that 18, 19, 20 bear market, it came down. Which historically has been the trend, right? People flee to quality, and they would flee to Bitcoin. Yep. And its initial spike was all on the ICO craze, which you had to buy ETH to do, right? So like, that's why it went up high. Then it rebounded. Its more local last few years high was all on the merge, right? So this was all on. There was a very boring summer in crypto markets. This is like 2022, right? And like, people got really excited. Traders got excited about the merge, like when Ethereum, right? They changed out the engine mid-flight, right? They changed from proof of work consensus to proof of stake. And so there's a huge run up then when people are like playing a trade around whether this was bullish, right? And it peaks at the merge, and it's been basically down only since. And that's like 2.5 full years of down only ETH BTC ratio. Literally lower lows and lower highs pretty much the entire time in a pretty nice downward channel, right? I think this time is a little different, right? I mean, you're in a bull market. Historically, these bull market, you think, I mean, Bitcoin's the only asset that made a new all-time high so far, right? Yep. ETH has not. And I think even Solana, which, 10x'd from fall of last year till now, or till recently or whatever, like, still didn't make a new all-time high yet either. I think the situation is kind of different. You haven't seen an alt season. What we ended up seeing in crypto markets over the last year, a Bitcoin-led rally fueled in large part, I think, by hype around the ETFs. Think about this drumbeat, right? Like, we pretty much knew, the market was pretty sure they would be approved as early as like late September. And then you had months and months and months of like James Seyfarth and Eric Balchunas like updating us with new filings. I mean, it was a really fun market, to be honest, because you had this drumbeat, and like, people that followed closely were pretty sure, even in August when that ruling came out against in Grayscale's favor against the SEC, that like, this ruling was the nail in the coffin for the SEC's denial arguments. Yep. So you had this giant drumbeat that, of course, did culminate with them launching in January, on January 11th. And then you had about 2 weeks where people hadn't really figured out how to like buy these yet or whatever, or like, getting turned on, but Grayscale was outflowing. And then after about 2 weeks in from mid to late January through March, you had just like unbelievable amounts of inflows into these products, and Bitcoin just ran to new all-time highs. Nothing else did, right? And then you had basically the hot from a token standpoint, the other hot thing in crypto, and I'm going to get to the question part of this because I think it's relevant, but was meme coins, right? There was all this meme coin frenzy. It was a point where 10,000 meme coins were being launched on Solana every hour. One of the most successful crypto startups this year is Pump.fun, which literally like automates the process of launching a meme coin, like from literally creation of the token to getting it on a Solana DEX, right? So that it can trade.
Turnkey solution for creating meme coins.
That's exactly right. And now obviously meme coins by definition have no utility, right? They are literally memes, like, to be clear, in case the audience is unaware, they have no purpose at all. That's the point. Yep. Separately, I think that like says something really dark about the state of the global economy and people's feelings of hopelessness of getting ahead, that they literally, it's somewhat akin to the rise of like sports gambling, in my view, which is, in at least sports, like, is teams playing sports. Like, it's not I mean, meme coins are the distillation of the most cynical way of trading, right? Like, literally trading it for no reason at all.
It's the apotheosis of financial nihilism.
It is. It absolutely is. It's extremely well said. I completely agree with that. And so you have this barbell of like the most iconic, secure, scarce digital asset ever created, like having institutional adoption on one side, and then all of the crypto stuff in the middle, not that interesting to the market. DeFi, NFTs, all doing like meh. Like, I mean, DeFi functioning successfully, but it's not, DeFi tokens not doing great and whatnot, and like the story isn't DeFi. The institutional traders that trade crypto, not energized by it. NFT trading volume still down a lot from where they were, right? All these sort of other narrative, Web3 like kind of going nowhere at the moment. Yep. A lot of that built on Ethereum. And then on the far other end, this like apotheosis of cynical hopelessness of meme coins. So that's where we've been. And because of that, and now, of course, as a platform, Ethereum effectively facing unprecedented challenge from Solana. Like, in all of the history of these networks, like, Ethereum's never faced such a compelling alt L1 as Solana. It's also fundamentally a different technology than Ethereum. So it's not just like previously all these Ethereum killers, quote unquote, were just sort of like clones of Ethereum, right? With slight tweaks. Solana is fundamentally designed much differently, for better or worse. I think all of this has really weighed on that ETH BTC ratio. And if you want to look at the ETH SOL ratio too, to learn about that story, you'll see it there as well. So I think Ethereum is sort of getting squeezed on both sides. It had tried to be, remember they altered the monetary policy yet again and started calling it ultrasound money, because the more it's used, the more deflationary it gets. Like, okay, it's interesting to me, but again, like that, I don't think they understand what sound money actually means, which is that the line should be straight. Like, we should know what the line is, right? It should be unchanging, credibly transparent, right? Which is what Bitcoin's monetary policy is. Whereas theirs is all over the place, right? And yes, it sometimes is more deflationary than Bitcoin. Great, okay, but like, the whole point to me of a sound monetary theory is even more than the fact that its monetary expansion declines over the time, sure, and eventually decays to effectively nothing. Even more than that, it's that it's predictable. It's transparent, predictable, incredibly unchanging. It's inelastic. Like, that's sound money to me. And of course, Ethereum is not that. So it fails at that. And I think smart people know this. Investors in Bitcoin, because of its monetary policy, they know that Ethereum is not credible in that way. And then as a platform, turns out, like, for applications and other types of crypto use cases, Solana has proven to be very competitive here, right? So in that sense, it's actually getting squeezed on both sides from a narrative standpoint. I think that's been a big part of that story. And yeah, we just haven't seen the alt season where like ETH and a bunch of alts rip. So like, I mean, I don't know if we will. I don't know that we won't. I do think Ethereum will find its footing a little bit now that it also has ETFs. Yeah. But also the recent drop, I mean, it's pretty much widely used now as like a collateral currency and not much more for the people that we talk to, right? So it's more about, well, can I buy ETH and fund it with, can I buy Solana and fund it with ETH, right? Like it's there. I would say, and does make me wonder about whether we are nearing a bottom in that ratio, because I can just tell you broadly around across the crypto trading, like diaspora, or I don't know, like
ecosystem
community like that we talk to, which is basically all of the biggest crypto trading funds who also trade Bitcoin, obviously. I would say it's pretty unprecedented bearishness for ETH, at least on a relative basis right now. And so you kind of wonder, also, if you look at, they have the same dynamic on a much smaller scale with the ETH ETFs with grayscale outflows and, net inflows into others. It's much smaller scale, to be clear. Like these things are trading $300 million of volume a day right now. On its like bad days, Bitcoin ETFs trade $1 billion. So it's like more than triple. And of course, grayscale, like GBTC was 30 billion in assets and outflowed half, which is a huge amount in an absolute basis. ETH was 10 billion. And so it's like, it was a third, right? So you are seeing the ETH outflows recede. And so you probably do start to get to a net inflows situation cumulatively for the ETH ETFs at some point, which should then be more constructive for ETH. But right now they're experiencing unprecedented outflows with an issuer complex that frankly was unprepared to market them, right? Because everyone thought they would be denied, and they really did think that. So, and most of them are focused on selling Bitcoin still. I think I bet you if you talked, if they would talk, off the record or candidly, most of the ETF issuers that have both would have preferred that the ETH ones were not approved yet, and that they could spend the next year or two educating and marketing the Bitcoin ETFs and then move to the Ethereum ETFs. Like there was not the like 5-month drumbeat and like anticipation and then like massive explosion of interest right when they hit them. I mean, I think people are going to look back and really be really blown away when they recall like the drumbeat of excitement for the Bitcoin ETFs was truly something you probably won't see again ever in markets. So all of that contributing to Bitcoin's outperformance.
That's a phenomenal summary. By the way, for listeners who feel like digging back into the archive, there's a period of probably a couple of years where I used to write articles. I did about a dozen articles for CoinDesk, and my goal was just to write about Bitcoin, basically just to get Bitcoin content, into the broader cacophony of, whatever gets published on CoinDesk. But I did write one article about Ethereum, and the title was "Sell the Ethereum Merge." Exactly.
That's a good call.
Exactly.
That's what happened.
Yeah, I actually did not expect that trade, at least in Bitcoin terms, to last as long as it has. But there you go. Well, you mentioned, Alex, use as collateral. Maybe we could talk about another form of collateral, which is wrapped BTC, WBTC. Yeah. I hear there's some news about change in the structure of wrapped BTC. My guess is you're aware of what's going on there. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on? Because this does affect the use of Bitcoin as collateral and therefore affects Bitcoin demand throughout the ecosystem.
Yeah, so wrapped BTC is an Ethereum token collateralized with Bitcoin 1-to-1, right? So think of it like a stable coin, except instead of tracking the dollar and holding dollar-like assets, BitGo issues the wrapped BTC token and holds Bitcoin in an equal amount. And it is a good tool if you're somebody who wants to use Bitcoin in other cryptocurrency ecosystems, primarily Ethereum DeFi, right? You want to lend Bitcoin or borrow Bitcoin using Ethereum's platforms, then wrap Bitcoin is the main way that people do that. And to BitGo's credit, this is a pretty good product. It has daily cryptographic attestations of the proof of reserves of the Bitcoin. BitGo, of course, a very old and long time multi-sig based and promoting Bitcoin custodian in the scheme of things, one of the oldest. And I think if you go, I think it's WBTC.network maybe is the dashboard. So if anybody wants to, let me just double check that so I give the correct URL. .network. I think this is the website. It is. Yep. So they have a dashboard. So they have 154,000 Bitcoin, which is a lot. I mean, that makes this product or whatever. And by the way, it looks like it's on several other networks too, not just Ethereum, but it's 154.265 BTC. And that is then tokenized into an ERC20 token on Ethereum, right? That lets you just do Bitcoin on Ethereum. Now, obviously,
this is
not
similar order of magnitude, right, to MicroStrategy or the biggest Bitcoin ETFs. Just so
that's right.
I set the stage for listeners. Like this is
that's right. That's a lot.
Cash. This is a major stack of coins.
Yeah, there's a large. If we look at where Bitcoins currently are sitting on the network, I think MicroStrategy is well over 200,000 Bitcoin at this point, but they may be the single largest holder probably at U.S. Some of it sitting with the U.S. government. A fairly large amount, or other governments that seize them, right? Remember Trump had announced in Nashville that he wouldn't sell those Bitcoin, and that would form the basis of the national strategic Bitcoin stockpile, he said. Other governments have seized Bitcoin, right? Germany was selling all this Bitcoin down that they seized from a piracy website. Of course, ETFs hold a lot of Bitcoin. And then, by the way, the plebs hold a lot of Bitcoin as well. Like the everyday person holds plenty of Bitcoin in that sort of capital stack. But one of the big ones is BitGo's wrapped Bitcoin product. So it does matter. Obviously, these WBTC tokens have different, I'll use the well overused term, trade-offs. They have different features than actually native Bitcoin, right? You're not inheriting the security of the underlying Bitcoin blockchain. You're relying, one, on the custody of BitGo, both their competence and their, that they're not malevolent. They don't steal the Bitcoin or something, right? Yeah. I think WBTC users know that, but it's not sovereign, right? Of course, you have smart contract risk related to both their contract that they issue it with and wherever you use it. If you put it in Aave or Compound or one of these DeFi applications on Ethereum, then you're taking risks there too. So it is different risk profile than native Bitcoin. Yep. But yes, native Bitcoin collateralizes it. My understanding of the story is that BitGo is now spinning it out into a joint venture with Bit Digital, which is a foreign company. I don't know exactly where, headquartered somewhere in Asia, that it involves Justin Sun, right? And I don't know, Justin Sun, the founder of Tron, and also, I believe, one of the largest crypto traders in the world. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the motivation for that. I don't know what it really will mean. What it appears to mean, I saw Mike Belshey, the CEO of BitGo, saying that there will be a multi-jurisdictional multi-sig now holding the keys for the underlying Bitcoin. Yep. I don't know, but I think some people are concerned about Justin Sun's involvement in that, right? So I think that's the story. I don't have much more information on it. I did see that MakerDAO, which is a decentralized stablecoin and sort of lending platform on Ethereum, one of the oldest DeFi apps, they allowed and had a large amount of their stablecoin DAI collateralized with wrapped Bitcoin. Yep. And there is a motion in their governance process to remove it as a thing in direct response to this. And I saw also that it appears Coinbase may be about to launch their own version of wrapped Bitcoin now, CBBTC, they said. So yeah, it's an interesting look. I would step back too and broadly say, people ask me, are the ETFs good for Bitcoin? Do we really want Bitcoin over there? It's not as good as, I personally self-custody my Bitcoin. I'm not going to say how, but I believe in using actual Bitcoin and gaining the full sovereign benefits of holding Bitcoin myself. And it's hard. And if you can't figure out how to do it safely, there's a lot of great resources out there, by the way, to help. But if not, I think that's okay. But I trust my stocks to Fidelity. I get it. But I also happen to believe that if you want Bitcoin to be extremely widely adopted as money, even just as digital gold, but let's even say money, if you believe in the concept of hyper Bitcoinization, that it's going to be so widely available that you might pay with it, you might save in it, maybe you'll invest with it. It's going to be in every single system, right? Dollars in a bank account are different than dollars in a money market fund and dollars in cash in your hand. They all are the same unit. They're all the same asset, but they have different properties. They have different, cash under the mattress is more secure than cash in the bank in terms of having it literally stolen from you, right? Like if you have your cash in a Cyprian bank and like in the, in the last decade, they took half of it, right? Like when the country was going bankrupt, like they did a haircut on it. This is what got the Winklevoss twins interested in Bitcoin, by the way. They can't do that if your cash is under the mattress. Similarly, like if they try to Executive Order 6102 your Bitcoin, if they just say that it's illegal to own Bitcoin the way that it once was illegal to own gold, well, if you have the Bitcoin self-custodied securely, like they're not going to be able to take it, right? So but if you have it at a third-party custodian or exchange, maybe they can. So there's different trade-offs, but I believe that in the long run, like for Bitcoin to be hyper successful, it needs to be everywhere. Bitcoin in your bank account, Bitcoin on your brokerage account, Bitcoin in your gold vault, Bitcoin perhaps on your Ethereum if Ethereum is going to exist. Like I don't view that like wrap Bitcoin as like bad for Bitcoin. The same way I don't really view the ETFs as bad for Bitcoin. I do think it's incumbent upon Bitcoiners to make sure that the values, the features and capabilities of Bitcoin that express its most important underlying values like permissionlessness, openness, credible monetary policy, self-custody, unstoppable payments, those features that enable those things do need to be protected in the protocol itself in the long run, because that is important. So if all the ETF issuers were to band together and say, we want a hard fork that makes Bitcoin KYC for every transaction, that has to be opposed, obviously, right? But luckily, it's not a proof of stake system. So the amount of Bitcoin that you hold basically gives you no technical advantage in dictating the future of the protocol, unlike a proof of stake network where capital literally controls consensus. So, but nonetheless, there's a giant pile of this Bitcoin and wrap Bitcoin. And I don't know. I mean, it looks like Coinbase is planning to compete. It's possible others will as well.
Does your Bitcoin custody setup keep you up at night? Maybe you still have coins sitting on an exchange worried about hackers. Or maybe you've set up your own self-custody but don't feel safe with your Bitcoin savings stashed on a little plastic device in your desk drawer. Gain peace of mind with Onramp and our multi-institution custody solution. Here's how it works. Onramp creates a dedicated multi-sig vault just for you. 3 separate institutions each hold a key. Onramp, BitGo, and CoinCover. But none can move funds unilaterally. Instead, only you have control over your coins. With Onramp's multi-institution custody, you'll sleep better at night knowing your Bitcoin is stored with best-in-class security on-chain with fault-tolerant multi-sig. If you believe your Bitcoin is going to be worth a lot someday, don't jeopardize that future by exposing your coins to hackers on exchanges, $5 wrench attacks in the real world, or perhaps most importantly, the risk that you might screw something up with a highly technical self-custody setup. Onramp's multi-institution custody eliminates single points of failure, reduces your personal attack surface and technical burden, and provides access to financial services that allow you to confidently secure your Bitcoin, including inheritance planning, insurance-backed warranties for all balances and transactions, low-cost trading, and more. Bitcoin is a once-in-a-species asset. Secure it right. Learn more at onrampbitcoin.com.
Yeah. No, I think it's really interesting. It's really well said with respect to the ethos of Bitcoin and the core factors that must be protected on the main chain. Some of our listeners will be hardcore Bitcoiners. They understand these distinctions. Others are newer and learning. One of the things we're doing at Onramp obviously is multi-institution, multi-sig. BitGo, by the way, is one of the key holders. Yeah. And so one way to understand this is wrapped BTC is, and maybe this new instantiation, likewise, by the way, Onramp's doing multi-jurisdiction custody. So these are sort of good ideas. They make sense with respect to security. For anyone who is willing to entrust, let's say, a quorum of third parties to hold their Bitcoin. Of course, with the wrapped BTC having the extra layer, as you pointed out rightly, of let's call it Ethereum risk or Tron risk or wherever that coin is wrapped, whatever wraps that coin is that other sort of additional layer of risk, which is worth being aware of and worth understanding.
Absolutely,
if you're playing in that space. And the reality of Bitcoin just being, if Bitcoin continues to succeed, people will do additional new and strange and sometimes terrible and sometimes wonderful things with their coins. And that's just going to be the path that adoption takes as this thing gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, we're gonna see weird stuff. I agree.
Well, you've already seen. You and I both have already seen quite a bit of weird stuff in our travels. You probably more than I have.
That's why I like it. I mean, that's one of the main things that draws me to this, to be a researcher in Bitcoin and in crypto, is it's just so interesting. There's just so much interesting stuff happening. Of course, I believe in the long-term future and importance of Bitcoin, but like also I just think it's a fascinating industry to cover and work in. There's so much weird and exciting stuff happening, and of course, at its best, right? Like crypto, including Bitcoin, can have such a massive change to the world, right? It can be such a positive at its best. At its worst, it's one of the most entertaining and terrible industries in the history of mankind, right? So like we've got such a broad thing. We just try, I try, Galaxy tries, for example, to be on the right side of that and not be part of the fraud or scams that have plagued, the high profile ones that have plagued us in the past. But yes, at its best, and Bitcoin is certainly on the side of the spectrum of the best. I think it's just such a fascinating and positive thing that it's just about, you trying to bend that arc over time towards, permissionlessness, scarcity, self-custody, and good monetary policy.
That's it. Never a dull moment. Very rewarding. Reminder, by the way, people, I periodically get inbound, asking me, should I come work in the Bitcoin industry? And I say, well, just don't forget the downturns and don't forget the cyclicality.
Oh, it hardens you. It hardens you completely, right? I mean, it's like, there's all these memes, they're like, oh my gosh, the NASDAQ down 5%. Like, stock guys like, despondent. He's freaking out, right? Bitcoin down 50%. We're like, do I have any more money to buy? Or like, we're like laughing memes on Twitter and stuff. I mean, it's we've been through a lot. The longer you're in this space, and by the way, just to be clear, I mean, volatility is going down over time. It has been, right? I mean,
yeah.
There was I actually remember there was one of the scariest downturns that I saw, and people don't talk about this a lot, was Labor Day 2017. Bitcoin was up around $4,000, crashed to like 1,400. It's a big drop, bigger than the 50% drop. This is during what we know now was a massive bull run. It ended up like almost 20xing from there, and in just a few months, right? But like people didn't know that was going to happen. They didn't know it was going to go to 20K in December 2017. Only 3 months before, it was down like 65% in the middle of what was supposed to be a bull market, right? We just saw a 25% drawdown and pretty aggressive recovery too. I mean, we're still in like the high 50s and low 60s. So we're not like back at all time highs, but like, I mean, that was a huge market move Bitcoin had last Monday and the weekend before, right? Like down 25% is a lot of money. You had a $10,000 red candle like on that chart. That's a big decline. But it was only like 25%. Like we've seen 60+% drawdowns during bull markets, right? So like if you've been in this space a long time, like and it's good because like the same people, if you look at the long-term Bitcoin price chart, or you explain and teach the fundamentals of Bitcoin, smart people understand that and see the long-term potential, right? But yet still a lot of these smart people are then like, oh my gosh, is it going to zero? And I'm like, well, how are you still asking that? Of course it's not going to zero.
What is this? A correction for ants? 25%?
Exactly.
I'll tell you,
exactly.
Alex, my first Bitcoin that I bought was literally the day after the hard fork, August 2nd, 2017. And it's not because I was waiting to see like how the hard fork would shake out. No, it's because I couldn't like fund my Coinbase account fast enough, right?
Yeah.
Because I had just discovered it, and Bitcoin was going to take over the world, and and. Yeah. And I also viscerally remember, because I made then subsequently a sizable buy right around, call it 5K, and it immediately went to 3K in like
right
3 days. And I was a little bit shocked and stunned. And so, yes, every new participant that comes into the market, maybe it's guys buying in the ETF. If they haven't owned it, well, it's like my dad used to tell me, you don't understand taking losses until you viscerally understand it, which is literally in your gut as it's happening to you. And so, yes, it's just I think human nature that may just be the way it goes.
Yeah, it really is. It's like that. There's that meme of like the two information desks, and one of them says like Bitcoin at 70K and it's totally empty, and then once, or sorry, it's Bitcoin at 50K and it's totally empty. And then the other one says Bitcoin at 70K and the line's out the door. And it's like, you know, if you love Bitcoin at 73K, you should love it at 50K. Like, isn't it cheaper? But it's just, people just can't do it, you know. But more people are getting good at doing it. More people are owning Bitcoin every day. It is also, I mean, I think this was very evident in Nashville, but and actually an Ethereum person wrote an interesting thread about this that was like a very focused Ethereum like ecosystem person was at the conference in Nashville. And they wrote a whole thread being like, I just need to explain to the Ethereum world that like what is happening in Bitcoin is completely different than what is happening in Ethereum from a movement standpoint. Like Bitcoin in a lot of ways is a movement even more than a money. And well, movements may have monies, and it certainly is a money. It's certainly a commodity type of asset as well. But the more and more people every day are owning Bitcoin and buying Bitcoin, and so that volatility does go down. So those people are learning, and the, you know, dude, I'm literally backing up the truck. I mean, I did another one was when BSV was forking from BCH, Bitcoin had literally like a dying patient had still the echoes coming down from the 2017 drawdown. So it's now like November 2018, almost a full year later, and it's still just like low, like kind of flat though, around 6 is the bottom, but just lower highs over and over again. And then it literally like flat lines at like 6K for like a month. And I'm like, all right, this is the bottom. We're at the bottom. I'm going to buy. And then I think probably because Roger Ver or like Craig Wright had some Bitcoin, and when they launched BSV, they decided to dump the remainder of their Bitcoin. It immediately nuked to 3K, like 50% additional drawdown from 6 to 3. And then that, of course, ended up being the actual bottom. And I was literally buying like, I was like, oh, it went below 6. It's been at 6 for a month. I was like 5,950. I'm like buying, right? Like you just get burned with that. I mean, you have a long, and again, I was buying the whole time anyway, probably all the way down. I still now I tell people I've been dollar cost averaging for 5 years now weekly, which is great because now I just know, look, I can tell you for a fact that I bought every top and bought every bottom. Why? Because I'm just always buying. Like, and this is also the mindset that I tell institutional investors. I try to, like, I'm not saying they have to think like that, right? They've got professional investors. They're going to do position sizing and portfolio strategy and maybe try to time the market because they're good at investing, right? Not everybody is, and I get that. But like, you know, I think I know that I bought every bottom because I'm just buying. And I try to explain to them that like, this is a mentality. Like try to explain the movement to the investors who see it as an asset or an asset class. And it is, but I'm like, there's also, you know, 10,000 people standing in a room to talk about Bitcoin now. Like you just don't fully get it unless you learn a little bit and get involved in Bitcoin culture. Like we're kind of built different at this point. And yeah, I mean, dips are for buying.
That's it, man.
I'd probably put that on my grave, buy the dip.
So it's funny you mentioned that story because I did essentially exactly the same thing. I went in with IRA money in the low 6s, thinking exactly what you thought. Like, okay, right, this is the floor. We're done here. And then gut wrenching puke downward. And that was, and in December it stayed down. And it was in January, the following month, that I started writing Why Buy Bitcoin. Partly because it was a test of the thesis. There was part of me was screaming, part of my brain was screaming, Andy, what if you're wrong? You better really make sure you understand this asset that you've put a substantial amount of your net worth into. And so that was the genesis for me of the research paper, you know, the test of the thesis. Like, oh God, I hope I don't have this wrong.
Well, and then by June of 2019, so just 9 months or 7 months after that drop from 6 to 3 at the end of 2018, Bitcoin traded over 13,000 during the first Bitcoin conference in San Francisco. And I recall that well. So we went from, in just 6 months, you went from 3 to 13. And just like, I mean, what you're kind of like, well, all right. So then your 5K buy or my 5,500K buy or 5,500 buy looks good. I think on pretty much, I think Jesse has put out content on this before himself actually, but there's very few times historically where you could have bought Bitcoin and lost money. That's it. If you hold for X number, and MicroStrategy at their conference in Vegas I was at, they had a good chart on this too. I think it's somewhere we can find, but like, again, similar idea. Like if you held Bitcoin for like more than X number of days, then it literally hasn't ever mattered when you bought it, basically, you know? So.
Yep, the cycles, if you can hold through a 4 or 5 year cycle, historically you've been in the green. There's also the corollary, which I think is unfortunate, which is if you buy the top, you will be underwater for a long time. Historically.
Yeah, historically speaking, that's true.
Exactly. Bitcoin spends most of its time well below the previous high price. So that's
it does.
another thing people should just get used to and try and remember. Well, we're getting up close to time here, but I do want to ask you one more thing about volatility. Related issue is I think we're still waiting for approval of options on the Bitcoin ETF products. And by historical standards, it's taking longer than usual, although that's been the story of all Bitcoin products, at least anything that you can hold in a brokerage account. Do you have any thoughts on the timing there? What's going on, as well as, you know, will that have a significant effect, do you think, on dollar price volatility, you know, once they are approved?
I don't have a good update. It is irregular for it to take this long. Pretty much any other ETF can get options. So it's not clear exactly what the issue is to me. You know, I mean, there is no court case forcing them to approve options at the SEC. I mean, we know that we have an SEC that is hostile to digital assets, including Bitcoin. You know, technically Bitcoin's the only asset they've said is a commodity. But I mean, like I said, they had to be dragged kicking and screaming by the federal court just to approve the ETFs. Nobody really knows why. I mean, I don't really know why. Do they just hate it? I mean, look, everyone knows Bitcoin's volatile. There are a ton of volatile equities out there. Like there's nobody, it's not illegal for an asset for investing to be volatile, right? No risk, no reward. Like everybody knows that. Like there's nothing, I can't think of another reason why they would be delayed. I do think that it would be positive. It should make the market more liquid in general. It should help. It'll certainly help institutional traders and people that work in Bitcoin, everybody from miners to the APs that create and redeem shares in the ETFs to other types of traders, macro traders, right? I mean, options are very useful. They're also useful for gaining leverage or hedging, which are kind of opposite. I think you should get them. I think you will get them at some point. I think one interesting thing people don't talk about is that it'll result in some changes in the Bitcoin market structure in that, like, you know, Galaxy is one of the biggest options market makers in Bitcoin. We do tons of options trading. And again, like, you know, everyone like Galaxy that does from GSR and Wintermute and Cumberland and whomever else, like these big institutional options desks, they'll be impacted by the launch of this, because there are plenty of, we'll still be doing it. And I don't want to speak to Galaxy's future strategies in this area, but like, let's say you're a traditional hedge fund or that wants to trade Bitcoin options. Like you can go to today you basically have to go over the counter to firms like Galaxy, right? And yeah, I mean, you can trade on Deribit if you can figure out how to trade in an offshore options exchange, right? Many can't. We don't really have listed spot options. Not really. I think there are a couple, like, but that's not where the volume is. I think you will see significant volume on the ETF options, which, because the Bitcoin ETFs are commodity-based trusts that have one job, which is to hold and track the price of Bitcoin. Like, it's from a pure exposure standpoint, it's identical. I mean, basically to trading an option based on a physical, quote unquote, spot Bitcoin. So I think you'll see some disruption in the Bitcoin exchange institutional trading world as these are approved. There's also other opportunities, like I said, that I don't want to speak to, but that's one of the things we won't talk about a lot. I think it could dampen volatility. It doesn't need to. It does help institutionalize the options, well, the trading capabilities that Americans would have access to. And look, Bitcoin is real. It's here to stay. You can buy it in trusts that are offered by the world's biggest asset managers. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to trade options on it like any other asset. Like,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely makes sense to me. It's a little bit of a head scratcher, but yeah, one of the many lessons learned in Bitcoin has been that things take longer than you might expect if there's any involvement of the SEC or other government agencies. Well, Alex,
Yep.
this has been a phenomenal conversation. Really appreciate it. I do highly recommend people follow you. Your Twitter X account is at Intangible Coins. Galaxy Brains, a great name, by the way. Galaxy
Thank
Brains
you.
podcast, like I said, I listen to it all the time. I get a lot of value out of it, so highly recommend that to people. What else? Any place else you want to tell people that they can find you, or anything else you want to close with?
I mean, I love the podcast. I'm really interested. I love multi-sig in general. So I love that you guys are trying to and working to bring multi-sig to institutional and institutional investors, retirement investors.
Yep.
I think it's really powerful. I think multi-sig is one of the most, and by the way, Bitcoin has multi-signature custody as a native feature, right? It's not a native feature on Ethereum. It has to be done with smart contracts and sort of generalized. It can be done, but it's not a native feature. Yep. So I encourage people to look into multi-sig technologies from providers themselves, whatever. In general, I think is really powerful. You can read our stuff too at galaxy.com/research. We write a lot about Bitcoin, a lot about policy, about other cryptos too, if you're interested. I really tell my team our focus is to not just tell you what's happening, but to offer a viewpoint. So you can obviously disagree with the view, but I feel that it turns out, unfortunately, people are lazy. They like to be told how to think. We'll always offer a view, right? We're not just like, here's an overview of XYZ. We'll always be like, this is why it matters or doesn't matter. Maybe we don't think it matters, or this is the way to think about it. So we try to offer a little bit more insight than some of our sort of other friends in the research world. So check us out, galaxy.com/research.
Love it. And just in case anyone had any doubt about whether Alex Thorn has a view on things, he definitely does. That's one of the things I most appreciate about you. So
yeah, my views are not scarce. I'll tell you that, Andy.
Well said. Well, we'll close on that one. And thank you, Alex, for coming on Scarce Assets.
Thank you, Andy. Great to be here.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the show. If you found the information valuable, please share the episode with a friend or leave a rating on your favorite podcast app. All the links we discussed in today's show will be in the show notes inside your podcast app. Before we finish, a quick reminder that Onramp Media is for informational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing should be construed as investment or legal advice. Regardless of where you are on your Bitcoin journey, we'd love to hear from you. Visit onrampbitcoin.com/contact to schedule a consultation with one of our private client advisors.